she perfumed up her linen and enticed him, and he ended up falling to her grasp. And the Proverbs ends up by saying that he goeth after her straightway, as an ox to the slaughter, or as the fool to the correction stocks, till an arrow strike through his liver, as a bird hasteneth to the snare, and knoweth not that it was for his life. And so I put up these images so that we can see what Solomon was writing about in Proverbs. He said, like an ox going to the slaughter. You can see there is a cow that's all marked up and ready to go to be butchered, right? And so when we give into temptation, when as James said, when we let lust be conceived, and when lust brings forth sin, and now we're in this process of death, that we're like this ox going to the slaughter. And the reason that I put this up there, because I want us to see what it's like when we give in to temptation, and hopefully this will be a motivation for us not to do so. When we think about these pictures that Solomon uh, paints, uh, ox going to the slaughter. Look at the other one on the top right hand, a fool to the correction stocks. So that means that this guy right here is bound in these stocks, and being ridiculed. And a lot of times, it was right before a person was a victim of capital punishment. But then, you see like an arrow getting ready to go through the liver. So we see there a deer at the bottom left hand side that's in a trap, and that when it gets caught, it's just waiting there. Can you imagine just waiting there for somebody to come and put an arrow through you? And then Solomon gives us this last picture, as a bird hastens to the snare, and knows not that it's for his life. So this is the result of yielding to temptation. And it's a bad feeling to be in this place. And again, hopefully this should be motivation, for us not to want to be here, because it ends in death. So let me read James chapter 1, 13 through 18, and then we'll continue on from last week. In James chapter 1, verse 13, James says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But everyone is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bring forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bring forth death. Do not err, my beloved brethren, for every good and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Of his own will begot us uh, he of us with the word of truth, that we should be kind of first fruits of his creatures. So we're going to continue on uh, with the second part of this teaching on temptation, and we're actually going to be looking at the battle against temptation. The battle against temptation. So as we battle against temptation, James says uh, in verse 16, he says, do not err, my beloved brother. Do not err. The words do not err means to be led astray. So he said, don't get led astray about this whole idea of temptation, uh, especially when it comes to understanding the source of temptation. Don't think that it's God. Understand what the source of the temptation is. Now, uh, it's easy to blame someone else, right? And it's easy even to blame the devil. You may remember Flip Wilson, right? He His famous thing was the devil made him do it, right? And so what James is saying, James said, don't err. Don't err, my brothers. As you sit there in your living room, as you sit there on your couch or your bedroom or at your desk or at your kitchen table, no matter where you're at, he said, don't err. Don't make the mistake of misunderstanding where the source of temptation comes from. That if you blame other people, or even if you blame the devil, you have erred because you have not understood the source of temptation. Now we know that the devil is the source of all evil. We know that. We know that the devil is the source of a multitude of sins and wickedness. But when it comes down to this issue of temptation, let this sink deep in your soul. Let it flood your soul. That when we look at temptation, you know, it starts with us. To find the source of our temptation, all we need to do is look at the mirror, and we see that it springs forth from the lust within us. So the battle of temptation begins within you. And I can't emphasize this enough, because we want to, if we're a man, we want to say that it was the woman that seduced us, right? If we're a woman, we want to say that the man seduced us. They was looking all fine and everything else, right? And they said, no, no, it's not the outward source. If we're trying to stay off of a certain food, and we see it and we get tempted by it. Well, the source of the temptation is not the food. It's in you. All you got to do is look in the mirror. Somebody said, we have seen the enemy, and we is they. So James says that if you blame when you succumb to some temptation, or when you're tempted, if you blame anybody else, then you're in error. You gotta, it starts with you. You have to take the responsibility. And sometimes you have to say to yourself that I'm being tempted. You can't just try to be strong and try to say, well, no, this don't bother me. No. If you are being tempted, you have to acknowledge that. I mean, yeah, I would cry out to Lord, I'm being tempted right now. Lord, this desire in my heart, this lust that's in my heart is being stirred up at this point. Because again, like I said, many people face the same thing that you might be facing, and it doesn't bother them, right? Because they're not struggling with it on the inside. The difference is that there's something inside of you that's firing up this lustful desire that's trying to get you to succumb to the outward temptation. So again, I know y'all getting tired of hearing me say that, but James 16, he says, do not err. Don't get this thing wrong. You got to get it right, right from the beginning. As we look at the battle against temptation, look what he says here. He says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. So the battle of temptation is won when we draw close to God. When we draw close to God in our heart, the victory is secured when we are in a close relationship with him. Now, notice what it says. Who is the one that is the author of every good gift and every perfect gift? That's God. Now, when we think of good gifts and we think of perfect gifts, we think of somebody wrapping the bow around a brand new car on Christmas morning in front of our house, right? We think of somebody giving us a big box with a bow on it, with something that we really want. So, we would look at those things as being good gifts and perfect gifts. No, no, no. That's not what God. Those are not the gifts that God gives. Even though God might bless someone with that type of gift, Those are not the gifts here that James is talking about. James, the gift that he's talking about, takes us back to the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 13, where Jesus, when he was teaching the disciples how to pray, he said, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. Those are the good gifts that God is talking about. Yeah, there's other good gifts: salvation, grace, mercy, goodness, faith. Those are all good gifts. But in the context of James, and James says that every good gift and every perfect gift, well, what is he talking about? He's talking about that God gives us the ability to not give in to temptation. Wow, that's a good gift. Especially, let me see something here. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna come back to talk about that in a second, but let me give you 5 reasons to walk away from temptation. 5 reasons to walk away from temptation, and the reason that you need to do this, you need to walk away from temptation, is because of this right here. You don't want to end up like this, right? You do not want to end up like a cow going to the slaughter. You don't want to end up like a man in the stocks. You don't want to end up like a deer in a trap waiting to be shot. You don't want to end up like a bird, going to the snare and not knowing that it's for his life. You don't want to end up like that. So let me give you 5 reasons to walk away from temptation. The first reason is the monetary pleasure of sin lasts only for a season. I like what it says about Moses in Hebrews 11. It said that he would rather choose affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasure of sin for a season. Whatever it is that is tempting you, whether it's an illicit relationship, whether it's some food that you've kind of swore off, you said that you're not going to eat, whether it's you addicted to spending, whatever it is, that momentary pleasure lasts only for a season. If you think about the person that has an affair, right? And now, even if it's an ongoing affair, that whatever pleasure you get out of it, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. As a matter of fact, I think, yeah, this is my next point. So let me just go to my next point. The momentary pleasure of sin is never satisfied, and this is a verse that I've shared with you guys over and over again in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 8, where Solomon says that the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear satisfied with hearing. So if it's a one-time fling, right? Just think that the pleasure only lasted for that moment, and now it's gone, and you ruined your life because of a momentary pleasure. Well, you might say, well, this person is in an ongoing affair. Well, look at this. Those are just momentary pleasures that are what? Never satisfied. You're right. You got to keep coming back over and over and over again. So not only are you in something that is giving only a short time pleasure, but now you've kind of got addicted to it, right? So, I mean, again, we're talking about like sexual sins, but it can go beyond that. So, just don't want to lock in on that. So it's never satisfied. That whenever whenever we give into our lusts, and we succumb to temptation, it's never going to be satisfied. It's something that's done over and over again. The momentary pleasure of sin can bring a lifetime of pain. For the life of me, I'll never understand. I mean, I guess I can't understand, how people get tempted and, step away from their marriage. And now you got to deal with your spouse. And that's something that hurts your spouse. And most likely, even though you might go through counseling and you might get healed and go on to have a good marriage, that's still something that is always in that person's mind. And I'll be honest with you, I've done a lot of counseling in this area, and I can say, pretty much that the pain of it gets less and less and less. But you know what? People still hurt. They still hurt from that. And it's all because somebody in their relationship, wanted a momentary time of pleasure, and yet and still it's brought a lifetime of pain. And just the fact that now, things most likely, even though the relationship might be restored, the fact of the matter is, will things ever get back to the way that they were? Most of the time they won't. Sometimes they can, but most of it, like I said, people can work through it. They can heal from it. But there's always scars that are left there. Number 4, the momentary pleasure of sin can bring great loss. When you look at David, and he walked out on his porch and saw Bathsheba taking a bath, and he ended up, having a relationship with her. And then Nathan the prophet came to David and challenged him for what he did. What happened to David? Nathan said, you're going to pay. You're going to pay for your sin. And look at David. I mean, look at all the relationships of his kids that suffered because of his sin. And then even the child that was born between him and Bathsheba died. So the momentary pleasure of sin can bring great loss. Saints, and as I say this, I know the devil hears me, and y'all pray for me. But you know what? One of the reasons that, well, let me give you 3 reasons why I remain faithful in my marriage to my wife. Let me give you 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is because I love the Lord and I want to be obedient to him. Reason number 2, I love my wife and I don't want anything to come between us to this degree. And reason number 3, I love preaching and teaching the word of God. And for me, I'm just going to be honest. I think that even if I tried to cover it up and nobody else knew, that I couldn't stand in the pulpit, or I couldn't stand behind the sacred desk, as they call it, and teach and preach the word of God, knowing that I've committed such a grave injustice. And to me, it would just be, it would be a great loss for me. It would be a loss to not be able to stand before the people of God and share the word of God. And so I look at that, and to me, I say it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. And sometimes, saints, maybe that's the way that we need to look at things, as I've been saying. Maybe we need to look at the end result, and we need to say, it's just not worth it. Whatever it is, it's not worth the damage. It's not worth the loss that is going to take place, as a result of me allowing my lust to give in to temptation. And then number 5, the momentary pleasure of sin can bring torment to the soul. Man, even though people try to, maybe sweep it out of their mind, once they've given into temptation, man, it's a torment to the soul. And again, I've worked with enough people and I've counseled enough people to know that when they give in to temptation, how their soul is tormented, how it's just something that bothers them. It's something that eats away at them. And to the blessing of not having something to eat away at your soul like that is worth it all. Is worth it all. You know, some people go to their grave, you know, knowing that they've given into temptation and they haven't shared that with anybody. And even though outwardly they haven't shared it with anybody, inwardly their soul is being tormented. Their soul is being torn apart. And then you eventually, some people, you know, they try to sweep it under the rug, but it begins to bother them so much that they have to share with somebody. That's why, you know, when you look at like a lot of people in the Catholic Church, you know, what did they have? They had that thing where they went to the priest, right? Confession, that they didn't have to necessarily confess to anybody else, but, you know, they would go to the priest and they would confess to the priest. And why would they do that? Because that was their way of trying to relieve some of that torment that was in their soul. And so I'm trying to help make somebody here, and maybe this is something that you can share with somebody else, just to let them know it's not worth it. It's really not worth it. So, you know, that's 5 reasons to walk away from it. So, you know, again, let me go back to the point, and that is James says that every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. So God gives you the strength, the ability, the wherewithal to be able to resist temptation. Why? Because he gives good gifts and he gives perfect gifts. And what are 2 of God's good and perfect gifts? One gift is that he leads us not into temptation. Another gift is that he delivers us from evil. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Thank God for his good and his perfect gifts. The next thing we see in the battle of temptation, notice that it says God is also, in James chapter 1 and verse 17, the father of lights. He's the father of lights. Well, what does that mean? This actually was an ancient Jewish title for God. It referred to him as the creator and the giver, the great giver of light in the form of the sun, moon, and stars. Uh, so, you know, this is a quote by John MacArthur, and what he's saying is that God is the father of lights. He's the father of the sun, the moon, and the stars. But let me take that a step further. He's not only the father of physical lights, which I believe this is talking about here. Just think, what did God do? God brought light out of darkness, right? That's how powerful God. Last Sunday we talked about Elohim, the creator God. And God is the father of lights, that when you see the sun, who's the father? When you see the moon, who's the father? When you see the stars, who's the father? God is the father of lights. And given that fact, that means that he created all light that exists. And that light is both physical and spiritual. So that when we walk to the light, that we are actually walking away from temptation. What did we say in this? Let me go back so I can pull my point up right here. Uh, okay. Okay. When we draw close to God, right? The battle of temptation is one when we draw close to God. So when I draw close to God, I'm drawing close to the Father of lights. I'm drawing close to the one who sheds light on darkness. And what God is going to do, he's going to magnify that temptation and scream. I'm going to show you a verse here in a second where we're going to talk about that. But God, when temptation comes, God puts up all these bells and whistles, woo, 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 all these flashing lights, right? Because what? Oh man, that sounds like a sermon there. Because he's the father of lights. He brings all these flashing lights when temptation is there and lets you know, hey, you're getting ready to step off into something that you shouldn't step into. And so as we draw close to God, we see these lights. as we draw close to God, we hear these bells and whistles, and they serve as a warning to us in our battle against temptation. Oh, I like that. The Father of lights, the Father of lights. Then we see James says in verse 17, every good and perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness. The lights of heaven, the sun, moon, and stars, they change, right? Uh, we believe in the law of entropy, which says that everything in the universe is pretty much winding down, right? So even the stars, contrary to evolution, that tells us things are getting greater and greater, right? We know that things are winding down, and so the sun, moon, and stars, they all change, and one day they're going to be destroyed. Revelation 21 tells us that, and First Peter tells us that one day the heavens will be destroyed. But God's light, God's spiritual light, will never change. There's no variableness. There's no changing with God. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Therefore, as we draw close to the Father, he will shine light upon the temptation and lust. Because his light doesn't change. Now, I like this next one right here, and that is, there's no shadow of turning with God. There's no shadow of turning with God. Now, other heavenly bodies can cast shadows. We have eclipses, right? And what is an eclipse? Eclipse is because one body has gotten in front of another one and cast a shadow, right? And so, even with the physical lights, there can be a casting of shadow. Oh man, I love this here. But there is never, wow, there is never a shadow cast on the one who created them. His light is ever shining brightly, overcoming the darkness wherever it appears. There's nothing that can cast a shadow on God. I like, let me read it for you in John chapter 1, a powerful passage talking about God's light. It says, all things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. That word comprehend means to take it down, overcame it. That the darkness cannot overcome the light. And so whenever we're dealing with temptation and we have drawn close to God, that God lights up our spirit. God lights up the temptation and lets us know that this is not right. That he lets us know this is not right. And sometimes, we refuse to heed the warning. It's just like if somebody was telling you that the bridge is out, you would do wise to listen to them and stop and turn around. But some people don't believe what the person is saying, and they keep on driving, and they drive right off to the side. Why? Because somebody told them that the bridge was out, but they refuse to listen and obey. And God tells us sometimes that we're being tempted. He puts a temptation. He shines so much light on the temptation. Let me say, and I know y'all probably getting tired of hearing me talk about people being unfaithful in their relationship, but I just think that this is good fodder for explaining what we're talking about here. If you think about what it takes for a person to be unfaithful in their marriage, right? There's got to be some kind of hookup somewhere, whether it's Twitter or text or email or phone call or note or see somebody, and then you got to make a arrangement to hook up with this person. You got to find somewhere to go. You know, there's just look at all the stuff that has to be done before the lust yields to the temptation and it becomes sin. And I believe that during that process, if you've drawn close to God, that God is going to, man, he's going to give you so many flashing lights and whistles that that the only way that you're going to continue on to allow it to become sin is for you just to absolutely disregard the conviction of God, the conviction of the Holy Spirit, because God leads you to the place of light. He shines a light. Look what it says here in verse 5, John chapter 1, verse 5. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. I like the word overcome. You know, it comes from a Greek word that means to overpower or take down. That temptation, lust, cannot overcome God, cannot overshadow God, but God is the one who's able to take them down. So as I begin to wrap this up today, what are some ways that we can deal with temptation? Well, like I said, draw close to God. All right, if you're walking close to God, you know, you're going to be able to handle that desire in your heart that's reaching out for that object of temptation. And even, you know, God is able to deal with the desire, and then God is even able to take away the temptation. In James chapter 4 and verse 8, it says, draw close to God and he'll draw close to you. So if you want to have victory in walking with him, just stay in touch with Jesus. Just, you know, I remember a guy, I was doing a revival one time, and I was staying at his house, and he would go around singing this song, and the words went just like this: stay in touch with Jesus and he will keep you sweet. And you know, that song just stayed with me all these years. That was way back in the 70s, and that song still stays with me. Keep in touch with Jesus and he will keep you sweet. And so if you draw close to God, you know, he's going to help you deal with those desires in your heart. If you are having your quiet time, if you are worshiping him, if you are praising him, if you are fellowshipping, if you are doing these things, if you're drawing close to God, he's going to help you be able to deal with that heart situation. Secondly, stay away from the things that stimulate lustful desires. You got to stay away from them. You know, it's like, you know, the story that I told, right? A guy walked down the street, he fell in the hole. The next day, he walked down the street, he fell in the hole. The next day, he walked down the street, he fell in the hole. The fourth day, he crossed the street and walked down the other side. Right? After 3 times of falling in the hole, he realized, look, I need to stay away from this side of the street. I need to walk down the other side of the street. And so, in order for you to deal with temptation successfully, you need to stay away from those things that stimulate lustful desires. Psalm 103 in verse 3, the psalmist said, I will put no wicked thing before my eyes. Why? Because he realized that the eye gate was a source of temptation and appealed to some of the lust in the heart. And so he said, I will put no lustful desires, or I will put no wicked thing before my eyes. Number 3, and I've already said this, look for God's way out. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. 1 Corinthians, let me find that here, and I'm going to read it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. And it says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not permit you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape. that you may be able to bear. Look for God's way out. See, a lot of times instead of people looking for God's way out, they're looking at the object of temptation, and they're moving towards that, right? Like that bird I told you about last week, right? And the cobra mesmerized the bird, and the bird was mesmerized by the cobra, and the bird got closer and closer to the cobra until finally the cobra opened up his mouth and swallowed the bird, jumped out and swallowed the bird up. Why? Because the bird was mesmerized by the object of the temptation. You got to look for God's way out. You can't look at the temptation. You can't look at the temptation. I'm going to get the victory over you. No. God said, I've made a way out for you, and you've got to look for the way out that I have provided for you. And then the last thing that you do to deal with temptation, and this sounds simple, but it's the advice that Jesus Christ personally gave to the disciples. He personally gave this advice to the disciples, and he said this: watch and pray. Matthew chapter 26 and verse 41. Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus said, in order for you to deal with temptation, you got to pray. And you got to ask the Lord, Father, lead us not into temptation and deliver us from evil. So the takeaways, we saw these last week. God does not tempt anyone to do evil. Temptation is a combination of lust in the heart and some outward stimulus. When temptation is acted upon, the specific consequence is death. And that's not necessarily all physical death. And then the point that we get from today is when we draw close to God, he shines the light on temptation and opens our eyes to it. So that is James's take on temptation.
Pastor, when you were talking about marriage, I heard that you and Angie